Welcome to NASA Edge.
An inside and outside look at all things NASA.
We're here at the Virginia Air and Space Center in Hampton, Virginia,
Which is the official visitor center for NASA Langley Research Center.
which is very appropriate because we're here today to celebrate.
The 40th anniversary of man landing on the moon.
And also, can I say it?
Yes, absolutely.
It's NASA Edge's 40th podcast.
And I'm feeling very festive.
Yes.
Well, lots of festivities, lots of celebrations.
Festivus for the rest of us.
Festivus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, and now for the feats of strength, where I'm going to lift the Apollo 12 capsule over my head.
Hey, yeah, behind us is the Apollo 12 capsule, and this is a pretty cool museum because right on the second floor is a new exploration exhibit. So if you ever get a chance to come down to the Virginia Air and Space Center, come check it out.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves because we're here to celebrate exploration in the past.
Absolutely. And in fact, we have an engineering guru with us today. His name is Ed Kilgore, who worked at NASA Langley during the Apollo days and eventually became the associate administrator at NASA headquarters.
You know, his nickname could actually be Mr. Apollo.
Yeah, because
That's true.
and he's a fix-it guy, hands-on guy.
But the great thing about this is, you know how all the astronauts get the limelight? We want to kind of go behind the scenes, talk to some, Ed, who was an engineer who worked on it, to kind of get nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts of the whole program.
Behind the scenes.
That's right. And in fact, we have a celebration at the end, right? Because you're going to get a cake?
Yes, I am going to get a cake.
You got the cake, right?
You got the cake.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I've got the cake. But you know, I've got an errand to run. You just
Okay.
go ahead with the interview, but I'll catch up with you. I just got to go make a few preparations. No biggie.
Sure.
No problem.
Hey, you're watching NASA Edge.
An inside and outside look at all things NASA.
Okay, I just need a bus schedule and some tokens, and I got to find a bakery.
So Ed, how did it feel when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin first landed on the moon?
Well, first there was euphoria. You know, to me, it meant that this was the greatest technical achievement that man had ever had. But here was a technology that had been put to use that far exceeded anything that had ever been done in history. And then the second thing I couldn't help but think of was that the people who did this, my friends, and a lot of them from Langley, a lot of them from Virginia Tech, were just barely out of college for a very few years. And the press likes to call these people rocket scientists, but there's no such thing. These are rocket engineers. Scientists dream of things and engineers do them. They put them into hardware. And you know, looking back at my lifetime, I think this is probably the greatest time you could have chosen if I could have chosen to live. See, I was born in 1923. And since that time, almost everything that's been perfected in the way of technology has happened. And all these things came flooding through my head when I saw that on that little black and white TV screen at home, when I saw that landing on the moon.
Well, especially the fact that you did it within 8 years.
Yeah.
I mean, go through that process. In 8 years, you went from paper to landing on the moon. What's been that like during that time?
Well, it was a little bit more than that because everybody suspected that one of these days we'd be doing something like this, and particularly people at Langley. And a fellow named Max Faget and Cadwell Johnson were the designers of the Mercury, the Gemini, and the Apollo. And I walked into Faget's office one day, and there up on the board, he had a little picture of a little capsule and had a guy in the fetal position all scrunched up in there, just barely enough capsule to hold him. And I said, Max, what is that? He said, well, we're going over to Wallops Island and we're going to put enough solid rocket motor on there. We're going to fire this guy into space. I said, well, you know he's going to pass out, so he'll come too. So, you know, things like that didn't bother people at all.
Right.
It didn't bother people who were going or the people who were planning it. Of course, his proposition of going to Wallops got preceded by the fact that the Mercury came along.
Right.
And the Mercury was just a small, scaled-up version of what I saw on his wall in there. And then, of course, the Gemini came along. The Gemini was run by a fellow who was at Langley, and the Gemini was done with just one thing in mind: the fact that you had to rendezvous in order to get to the moon.
Right.
You had to rendezvous once you got there. And that in itself was an interesting story. A fellow named John Hobolt and Michaels did calculations which showed that you could get to the moon with about half the propulsion if you rendezvoused at the moon. And then the small capsule went off. And in order to do the lunar orbit, though, and the rendezvous, you had to perfect rendezvous, which nobody had ever done.
Right.
Chuck Matthews, who was at Langley, took over the project, building the Gemini capsule and planning the mission so that you could practice rendezvous. And they practiced it, they perfected it there. So that was how the Apollo kind of got where it is.
So Ed, what does it feel like to be part of the Apollo project from the beginning to the end, having been there the whole time?
Well, as I said, that's almost euphoria again when you think about it. It's something that'll never happen again in my lifetime. It's really an amazing thing to think that it happened and that I was some small part of it, or I got to at least observe.
Now, you had an opportunity to work with some of the Apollo astronauts, especially Neil Armstrong. In fact, off camera, you said that you actually shared an office with Neil. What was it like working with him back in the days?
My office was right next to Neil's, and there wasn't an hour of the day that some senator or some congressman was coming into his office with a bunch of people to get his autograph.
But you're telling a story where he actually put his feet on your desk, and so you actually had a chance to see the footprint.
Yeah, well, in Washington, almost nobody leaves at quitting time because it's gridlock down below.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So we would stay till about 6:30 every night, and the telephone would stop ringing, and he'd come in my office. I never went in his office because everybody was always descended on, but he came into my office, so that was an invitation to talk to him. Mm-hmm. And he would put his feet up on my desk, and rear back and talk, and he told me some interesting things. One was, he said, I did put the A in.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The second thing he told me, he says, the most interesting sight was not the moon itself. So that's a gray morass of rocks and dust. Mm-hmm. Says, but looking back at the Earth, so that is the most beautiful sight you'll ever see in your life.
Wow.
It's a beautiful colored marble out in space. And he said it made me realize that we've got to protect that marble in every way that we can. But in having his feet up on the desk, one day I was sitting there kind of snickering. He said, what are you laughing at? I said, I can't ever look at your foot, and I don't see that big footprint on the moon. And when he left Washington, he gave me a big picture of his footprint.
Going back to the beginning of the Apollo program, can you talk a little bit about the sense of urgency that you felt on yourself and the team after the Russians put Sputnik into orbit?
The Sputnik thing triggered a lot of things. As a matter of fact, it would take almost something like that now. If we talk about a Mars mission, it would take almost something like that now where it looks like the Russians or somebody is going to outclass us technically in order to make that a possibility. It was an opportunity with the Apollo to not only politically but technically to do something that would leapfrog the Russians, and by a long shot. And of course, nobody else in the world has ever done it to date. But there was a real sense of urgency to do this behind the scenes, that the Russians would plan some of this. And a matter of fact, later on, they did try to exceed us on the shuttle. And theirs was a flop, I guess, fortunately. But
because they didn't have engineers that went to Virginia Tech.
That's right.
That's true.
They didn't have Hokies.
Good call. Hey, I think we have Blair's back.
This is perfect. So I hope I'm not out of time.
What's this? Is
Happy Four. There was another cupcake, but I had to give it to the bus driver. It's quite a trip.
And we were going to, in celebration of Apollo's
Happy
40th anniversary and NASA, and the NASA Edge's 40th show, we were going to just give you a cake. But I can see that
it's a representative cake. It's a representative of a much bigger cake.
Well, since we knew you were going to come up short, we went and picked up a cake before we got here.
No, that's a good cupcake.
We knew this. We knew you were going to fail.
Cupcake. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good.
Yeah.
Oh.
So Ed, on behalf of NASA Edge, we'd like to offer you this 40th anniversary cake, and all the folks that worked on Apollo during the days, and I want to say thank you for everything that you've accomplished in your time, and what a wonderful time period.
That's beautiful. It really is, and I appreciate the time.
Happy anniversary. That's a pretty good cake, Franklin. Not bad, but I would not sell the cupcake short.
I think I'm going to take this cake.
I'm going to take that cake.
Be careful when you
Well,
cut it.
Can you at least go get a knife?
Yeah, and when you cut it, make
That
sure
is
it's
beautiful.
careful.
Happy 40th
'cause,
anniversary,
there
Apollo.
might be water ice underneath the icing there. So you got to be careful.
Everybody look this way. Happy 40th!
Happy 40th.
Happy 40th.